March 24, 1951. The White House, Washington, D.C. President Harry S. Truman is in the Oval Office reviewing the daily intelligence briefing with Secretary of State Dean Acheson. It's a Sunday morning. Quiet. Routine. The Korean War is stalemated but stable. American forces have pushed Chinese and North Korean troops back across the 38th parallel. Casualties are heavy, but the front is holding. Diplomatic efforts are underway to negotiate a ceasefire. Everything is under. Then, Press Secretary Joseph Short enters the room. He's carrying. His face is pale. His hand is shaking slightly. Truman looks up from the briefing papers. He sees Short's expression and immediately knows something is wrong. Short hands him the bulletin without a word. Truman reads it once. His jaw tightens. He reads it again. His hand grips the paper hard enough that it crinkles. He sets it down on the desk very carefully. Very slowly. "MacArthur said this?" Truman asks. His voice is quiet. Too quiet. To reporters? Short nods. "Yes, Mr. Rafai, President. It went out on all wire services 20 minutes ago. Tokyo dateline. He's threatening to expand the war into China." Acheson leans forward and picks up the bulletin. His expression doesn't change as he reads, but his knuckles go white. Truman's voice is barely above a whisper now. He just declared his own foreign from a theater command post. If you want to understand how one general's insubordination triggered the greatest constitutional crisis in modern American military history, hit that subscribe button right now and join the WW2 elite community. We bring you the untold stories of leadership, courage, and the critical decisions that shaped our world. Now let's see exactly what happened when Douglas MacArthur decided he was bigger than the presidency itself. Acheson spreads the full wire service copy across Truman's desk. The statement is printed in full. Official letterhead. Supreme Commander, United Nations Forces. Douglas MacArthur's signature at the bottom. The statement is extraordinary. MacArthur declares that China's military is incapable of waging modern war. He offers to meet personally with enemy commanders to discuss terms. He threatens expansion of military operations to Chinese coastal areas and interior bases if they refuse to negotiate. He essentially issues an ultimatum to a nation of 500 million people. It reads like a declaration of war. Except Douglas MacArthur isn't authorized to declare war. Only Congress can do that. Only the president conducts foreign policy. That's the Constitution. That's been the law since 1789. Truman pulls out a folder from his desk drawer. Inside is a directive dated March 20th, 4 days ago, sent directly to MacArthur through military channels. The directive is explicit. All public statements on foreign policy require presidential clearance before release. No exceptions. Acknowledge receipt and confirm compliance. MacArthur acknowledged receipt on March 21st. Confirmed compliance. Then waited 72 hours and issued the most inflammatory statement of the entire war. "Dean, tell me I'm reading this wrong," Truman says. His voice is still quiet, but there's steel underneath now. "Tell me MacArthur didn't just threaten China with expanded war while we're trying to negotiate peace." Acheson looks up from the bulletin. "You're reading it correctly, Mr. Tesla, President." He issued it as an official statement from Supreme Commander. The UN allies are already reacting. The British Foreign Office called 36 minutes ago. London is furious. Paris wants immediate clarification. The State Department switchboard is lighting up. Truman stands and walks to the large map of Korea mounted on the office wall. His finger traces the 38th parallel, the front line, where American, British, Turkish, Canadian, and 14 other UN nations have troops engaged. "I ordered him explicitly," Truman says. "No policy statements without clearance. That was 4 days ago." "Yes, sir." "Then this isn't a mistake. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is deliberate insubordination." Acheson sets down the bulletin. "President, there's something else you should know. We've received intelligence that MacArthur has been telling visitors in Tokyo that Washington doesn't understand the Asian situation, that political leadership is tying the military's hands, that he knows how to win this war if they'd just let him." Truman turns from the map. "How reliable is this intelligence?" "Multiple sources, including some of our own diplomatic personnel who've..." The room falls silent. Outside, the morning traffic on Pennsylvania Avenue continues. Somewhere in the building, a telephone rings. The normal sounds of government on a Sunday morning. But in this room, the President of the United States is confronting something that hasn't happened in American history. A theater commander conducting independent foreign policy in direct violation of constitutional authority. And Truman doesn't know yet about the letter. The one MacArthur sent to Congressman Joseph Martin. The one that will arrive in Washington in 5 days and turn this crisis into a constitutional showdown that will end one of the most celebrated military careers in American history. According to Dean Acheson's memoir, Present at the Creation, Truman said something else in that moment. Something he didn't write down in his diary, something Acheson only revealed years later. MacArthur has left me no choice. He's not just questioning policy, he's making his own. That ends now, March 24, 1951 afternoon. 2 hours after the MacArthur statement hit the wire services. The Pentagon. Secretary of Defense George Marshall is in his office when the secure phone rings. It's the White House. President Truman wants an emergency meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Immediately. Sunday or not. By 3 o'clock, the cabinet room is full. President Truman sits at the head of the table. To his right, Dean Acheson, Secretary of State. George Marshall, Secretary of Defense. To his left, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General Omar Bradley, General J. Lawton Collins, Army Chief of Staff. Admiral Forrest Sherman, Chief of Naval Operations. General Hoyt Vandenberg, Air Force Chief of Staff. Truman doesn't waste time on pleasantries. Gentlemen, the Supreme Commander in Korea just announced foreign policy to the international press, without authorization, 4 days after I explicitly ordered him not to. What am I missing? General Bradley speaks first. He chooses his words carefully. Omar Bradley is not a political man. He's a soldier, but he's also served long enough to know when the military is on. Mr. President, the statement is problematic. It contradicts current diplomatic initiatives. It suggests military options not currently authorized by your administration or by the United Nations command structure. Problematic? Truman's voice is sharp now. Omar, he threatened China with expanded war. He offered to meet with enemy commanders as if he's conducting negotiations. That's not his job. That's my job. That's what the Constitution says. Yes, sir. I don't need an assessment of whether the statement is problematic. I need to know if a theater commander can countermand presidential policy. Can he? Bradley meets Truman's eyes. No, sir, he cannot. Then we have a constitutional crisis. A 5-star general is conducting independent foreign policy. How do I fix this without losing the best field commander in the Pacific? The room is quiet. These are military men. They understand chain of command. They understand that MacArthur has crossed a line. But they also understand that Douglas MacArthur is a legend, hero of the Pacific War, the man who accepted Japan's surrender, the architect of Incheon, one of the most brilliant amphibious operations in military history. Relieving him will have consequences, military consequences, political consequences, international consequences. Dean Acheson breaks the silence. President, I'm not sure you can fix this. MacArthur has been pushing the Wake Island meeting last October where he told you the Chinese wouldn't intervene and then they did. The VFW statement in August where he criticized your Formosa policy. The letter to the veterans of foreign wars contradicting State Department policy. This isn't a single incident. This is a pattern. I know the pattern, Dean. But he's Douglas MacArthur. If I relieve him, the Republicans will demand my impeachment. Half the country thinks he's the greatest general since Robert E. Lee. George Marshall speaks for the first time. His voice is measured, calm, authoritative. Marshall is the elder statesman in the room. Former Army Chief of Staff during World War II. Architect of the Marshall Plan. If anyone's opinion carries weight, it's his. Mr. President, may I speak frankly? Please. What MacArthur is doing is fundamentally wrong. Not just wrong constitutionally. The military doesn't make policy, we execute it. That's the principle George Washington established. That's the principle that has governed civil-military relations for 160 years. If MacArthur can ignore your authority and remain in command, that principle dies. And if that principle dies, we're not a republic anymore. We're a banana republic where generals determine policy and presidents are figureheads. The words hang in the air. Nobody speaks, Marshall continues. I've known Douglas for 30 years. Served with him. He's brilliant. He's also the most arrogant man I've ever met. He believes his military genius gives him authority over policy decisions. It doesn't. Never has. Never will. Truman leans back in his chair. What are you recommending, George? I'm recommending you do what the Constitution requires. You're the Commander-in-Chief, not Douglas MacArthur. If he can't accept that, he needs to be relieved. And if that costs me the presidency? Marshall's response is immediate. Then it costs you the presidency. But you'll have done your duty. Some things are more important than political President, Atchison adds quietly but firmly, and if you don't relieve him, Mr. President, you establish that theater commanders can ignore presidential authority. There's no middle ground here anymore. Truman stands. He walks to the window and looks out at the Washington Monument in the distance. When he speaks, his voice is steel. Schedule a full cabinet meeting for tomorrow morning. I want every member present. I want the Joint Chiefs present. And someone send MacArthur a message through official channels. No more public statements of any kind. Not one word to the press, not one interview, nothing. If he wants to communicate policy recommendations, he can send them through proper channels to the Joint Chiefs and they can forward them to me. But he's done talking to reporters. Is that clear? Yes, Mr. Sayre, President, Bradley says. Good. This meeting is adjourned. As the room empties, Dean Acheson remains behind. He waits until everyone else has left. Harry, he says quietly, using Truman's first name, something he rarely does. You know where this is heading. Truman nods. I know. MacArthur won't stop. He thinks he's right. He thinks you're wrong. He thinks the American people agree with him. And politically, they do. His approval rating is 69%. Yours is 26%. I know that too, Dean. Then you know that relieving him might end your presidency. Truman turns from the window. Maybe. But not relieving him ends something more important than my presidency. It ends the principle that civilians control the military. And I won't be the president who surrenders that. But the real explosion is still coming. Because MacArthur isn't backing down. He's not staying quiet. And 5 days from now, the letter he sent to Congressman Joseph Martin will arrive in Washington and force Truman's hand in a way that makes this moment look like a mild disagreement. April 5, 1951. United States House of Representatives. Morning session. Congressman Joseph Martin of Massachusetts rises to address the chamber. Martin is the House Republican leader, the highest-ranking Republican in Congress. He's a MacArthur supporter. He's been critical of Truman's limited war strategy in Korea. He's holding a personal correspondence. From General Douglas MacArthur, the chamber quiets as Martin begins to read. The letter is dated March 20th. The same day Truman sent MacArthur the directive requiring clearance for all public statements. MacArthur wrote this letter, sealed it, and sent it to the Republican opposition leadership on the same day the president ordered him to stop making policy statements. Martin reads slowly, clearly, making sure every word is heard and recorded in the congressional record. MacArthur's letter criticizes Truman's limited war strategy. It advocates for using nationalist Chinese troops from Formosa to open a second front against mainland China. It argues for expanding the war beyond the Korean peninsula, and it ends with a line that will be quoted for decades. There is no substitute for victory. The House chamber erupts. Democrats are stunned. Republicans applaud. Reporters in the gallery sprint for the phones. Within 2 hours, the letter is front-page news across America. New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times. Every major newspaper prints the full text. MacArthur has done it, publicly contradicted the president, advocated for policies the administration has explicitly rejected, and he did it in writing to the opposition party leadership. On the same day, he was ordered to stop making policy statements. At the White House, Truman reads the newspaper accounts with no expression on his face. Press Secretary Joseph Short stands nearby, waiting. Get me Dean Acheson, George Marshall, and Omar Bradley, Truman says quietly. Emergency cabinet meeting. 6 o'clock tonight. Full national security team. Yes, Mr. President. And Joe, sir, tell them this isn't a discussion anymore. This is... That evening, the cabinet room fills again. This time, there's no question about what's going to happen. Everyone knows. The Martin letter crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Truman begins the meeting without preamble. Gentlemen, you've all read the... General MacArthur has now publicly contradicted presidential policy 3 times in 16 days. March 20th, I ordered him to clear all statements. March 24th, he threatened China. April 5th, his letter to Congressman Martin is read on the House floor advocating for expanding the war. The question before this body is simple. Can a military commander publicly oppose presidential policy and remain in command? George Marshall speaks first. No, Mr. President. What MacArthur is doing violates every principle of civil-military relations. I move that he be relieved of all commands effective immediately. General Omar Bradley, speaking for the Joint Chiefs, follows. President, the Joint Chiefs of Staff met this afternoon. Our recommendation is unanimous. General MacArthur should be relieved. He has violated the chain of command repeatedly and willfully. His public statements are undermining Allied confidence in the UN command structure. His policy advocacy is creating diplomatic complications with our allies. And most importantly, he's demonstrating that he believes his military judgment supersedes civilian authority. That cannot stand. Dean Acheson adds, Mr. Barrier, President, the State Department has received urgent communications from every major Allied capital, London, Paris, Ottawa, Canberra. They're all asking the same question. Does MacArthur speak for the United States government or doesn't he? Our allies need to know who makes American foreign policy. If the answer isn't the President, then our alliance structure collapses. One by one, every cabinet member speaks. The vote is unanimous. MacArthur must be relieved, but there's still the political calculation, and everyone in the room knows it. Vice President Alban Barkley raises the issue. Mr. President, I need to tell you what this is going to cost. The Republicans will demand impeachment. They're already calling for it. Senator Taft, Senator Wherry, Congressman Martin. They're going to say you fired MacArthur because you're soft on communism, because you want to lose the war. Your approval rating will drop below 20%. We'll lose seats in 1952? Maybe lose the White House? Truman nods. I know, Alban. Then you know this might end your presidency. Maybe it will. But not relieving him ends something more important than my presidency. The room is silent. Gentlemen, this is about constitutional principle. George Washington established civilian control of the military. Abraham Lincoln defended it when he relieved George McClellan. Now it's my turn. If MacArthur can ignore presidential authority and remain in command, then no future president will control the military. Generals will make policy. The commander-in-chief will be a figurehead. That's not what the Constitution says. That's not what the founders intended. And I won't be the president who lets it happen. He looks around the table. I'm going to relieve General MacArthur of all commands. Supreme Commander of UN forces in Korea, Supreme Commander of Allied powers in Japan, Commanding General, U.S. Army, Far East. All of it. General Ridgway will assume command in Korea. The order will be transmitted tomorrow morning. Are you sure, Mr. President? Someone asks. Truman's response is immediate. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And then Truman got the one about what MacArthur was telling visitors in Tokyo. According to multiple diplomatic sources, MacArthur was saying the Truman administration didn't have the courage to win the war, that Washington politicians were betraying the troops, that if America would just let him fight properly, he could end the war in weeks. That civilian leadership was cowardly and incompetent. He was building a narrative, not just disagreeing with policy, not just advocating for different strategies, building a public narrative that the president was weak, and he, Douglas MacArthur, was strong, that Truman was losing the war and he could win it. It was more than insubordination. It was positioning for political opposition, maybe even a presidential run in 1952. Truman read the intelligence summary in his private study that night. According to his daughter Margaret's later account, he said out loud to himself, "He's not just defying me, he's campaigning against me from a military command post, while Americans are dying under his command." By April 10th, Truman had made his decision. Now he just had to find the courage to execute it. April 10th, 1951, evening, the Oval Office. Harry Truman sits alone at his desk. In front of him is the relief order, typed, official, waiting for his signature. The document is simple, direct. Military efficiency. I hereby relieve General of the Army Douglas MacArthur of his commands of Supreme Commander, Allied Powers, Commander-in-Chief, United Nations Command, Commander-in-Chief, Far East, and Commanding General, U.S. Army, Far East. 5 positions, all terminated with one signature. General Matthew Ridgway, currently commanding 8th Army in Korea, will assume all MacArthur's positions. The order is effective immediately upon transmission to Tokyo. Truman picks up his pen. He hesitates for just a moment, not because he doubts the decision, because he understands what it will cost. His approval rating is 26%. MacArthur's is 69%. The American public loves Douglas MacArthur. They trust him more than they trust their president. Relieving him will cause a political earthquake. Republicans will demand him. The press will attack. Half the country will call him a traitor. His presidency might not survive, but the alternative is surrendering civilian control of the military, and that's not negotiable. Truman signs the order. His signature is firm. No hesitation in the actual moment. He sets down the pen and presses the intercom button. Joe. Send this to the Pentagon immediately. I want it transmitted to General MacArthur in Tokyo tonight. Last eyes only. Make sure he receives official notification before the press gets wind of this. Yes, Mr. President. And Joe, schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. I'll make a statement explaining the decision. After short leaves, Truman sits quietly for a moment. Then he picks up the phone and calls Omar Bradley. Omar, I've signed the order. MacArthur is relieved effective immediately. You'll get official confirmation from the Pentagon within the hour. Then Bradley's voice, quiet but firm. It's the right decision, Mr. President. The only decision. I know, but it's going to destroy me politically. Maybe, but you're doing your duty. That's what matters. Thanks, Omar. After he hangs up, Truman writes in his diary. The entry, published years later, reads, "This is the toughest decision I've had to make as president. Not because I doubt it's right, but because I know what it will cost. MacArthur has left me no choice. He believes he's above civilian authority. He's not. Nobody is. Not in America. I'm the President of the United States, and Douglas MacArthur is not. Somebody has to be president of this country, and as long as I am president, I'm going to decide policy. Not Douglas MacArthur, not anybody else. But there's a problem with the transmission, a communications delay, a security protocol issue. The message to Tokyo is delayed and in that delay, the press gets the story. April 11th, 1951. Tokyo, Japan. General Douglas MacArthur is hosting a luncheon at his residence for a visiting senator. It's a social occasion, light conversation, political pleasantries. MacArthur is relaxed, confident, in his element. An aide enters the room. He walks quickly to MacArthur and whispers something in his ear. MacArthur's expression doesn't change, not even slightly. He nods once. The aide leaves. MacArthur continues the conversation as if nothing happened. 10 minutes later, he excuses himself. Forgive me, Senator. I have some urgent business to attend to. Please, enjoy your lunch. I'll return shortly. He doesn't return. What the aide whispered was this: Sir, the press is reporting that President Truman has relieved you of all commands. The official message hasn't arrived yet, but multiple news services are confirming the story. Douglas MacArthur learned he was fired by hearing it on the radio. The official military communication he should have received first was delayed. So, he found out from journalists the humiliation was deliberate, MacArthur believed. Truman wanted to embarrass him, wanted to make sure the world knew before MacArthur did, wanted to strip him of dignity along with his commands. Whether that's true is debatable. The evidence suggests it was a genuine communications failure, but MacArthur believed it was intentional, and that belief shaped his response. Within hours, MacArthur issues a statement, brief, dignified, no anger visible. I have just received information that President Truman has relieved me of all my commands. I will of course comply immediately with the President's order. I go now with a grateful heart to return to my family in the United States, having done my best for my country in the positions entrusted to me. Public, gracious, professional, everything you'd expect from a five-star general. But privately, to his staff, MacArthur says something different. According to multiple accounts from aides present, he calls Truman's decision political cowardice and a betrayal of every soldier fighting in Korea. He says history will vindicate him and condemn Truman. He says the president doesn't have the courage to win wars. The confrontation isn't face-to-face. It happens through statements and press releases and public positioning. Truman in Washington explaining his decision. MacArthur in Tokyo preparing to return home after 14 years overseas. Truman's official statement is released April 11th morning. It's careful, legalistic, focused on constitutional principle. Full and vigorous debate on matters of national policy is a vital element in the constitutional system of our free democracy. It is fundamental, however, that military commanders must be governed by the policies and directives issued to them in the manner provided by our laws and Constitution. In time of crisis, this consideration is particularly compelling. General MacArthur's place in history as one of our greatest commanders is fully established. The nation owes him a debt of gratitude for his distinguished and exceptional service. For that reason, I repeat my regret at the necessity for the action I feel compelled to take in this case. Professional, respectful, but firm. MacArthur's farewell message to his troops is emotional, personal. It becomes famous. I am closing my 52 years of military service. When I joined the army, even before the turn of the century, It was the fulfillment of all my boyish hopes and dreams. I still remember the refrain of one of the most popular barracks ballads of that day, which proclaimed most proudly that old soldiers never die, they just fade away. And like the old soldier of that ballad, I now close my military career and just fade away, an old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. But the real moment, the quote that defines this entire crisis, comes in private. April 11th afternoon. Truman is meeting with his staff in the Oval Office. The press conference is over. The statement is released. Now it's just the president and his closest advisor. Someone asks if he regrets the decision, if he wishes there had been enough. According to White House aide George Elsey's notes, Truman's response is immediate and profane. I fired him because he wouldn't respect the authority of the president. I didn't fire him because he was a dumb son of a bitch, although he was. But that's if it was. Half to three-quarters of them would be in jail. The room laughs. Nervous laughter, but laughter. The tension breaks through. Then Truman gets serious. His voice changes. This is the historian speaking now. The student of the Constitution who taught himself law and American history. He wouldn't obey orders. That's insubordination. I'm the president, not him. Somebody has to be president of this country, and as long as I am president, I'm going to decide policy. Not Douglas MacArthur, not anybody else. That's what the Constitution says. That's what George Washington established. That's what Abraham Lincoln defended. And that's what I'm going to enforce, even if it costs me everything. This wasn't about policy disagreement. Every president has generals who... Abraham Lincoln had George McClellan, who thought Lincoln was incompetent and said so privately. Franklin Roosevelt had generals who questioned his unconditional surrender policy. That's normal. That's healthy. Military leaders should give their best advice. But MacArthur didn't just. He conducted independent foreign policy. He issued ultimatums to foreign governments without authorization. He threatened military action beyond his authority. He advocated for policies directly to opposition party leadership to undermine the president. He told visitors that civilian leadership was weak and cowardly. If Truman had allowed that to stand, he would have established that popular generals can ignore presidents, that military commanders can conduct their own diplomacy, that battlefield success grants political authority, that the commander-in-chief serves at the pleasure of his theater commanders instead of the other way around. 26% approval rating. Political suicide, impeachment threats, a possible end to his presidency. But Truman did it anyway, because the alternative was surrendering civilian control of the military, and that principle was more important than Harry Truman's political survival. April 17, 1951, Douglas MacArthur returns to the United States for the first time in 14 years. 14 years. He left in 1937 to become military advisor to the Philippines. Stayed through World War II, through the occupation of Japan, through Korea. An entire generation had grown up never seeing him on a... Now he's coming home. In triumph, his supporters say. In disgrace, his critics say. The plane lands in San Francisco. The reception is overwhelming. Hundreds of thousands of people line the street. Some estimates say 700,000. Maybe more. They wave American flags. They cheer. They weep. MacArthur rides in an open car through the city. The adulation is deafening. Then he goes to New York. April 20th. The ticker tape parade is the largest in New York City history. Larger than Eisenhower's return from Europe. Larger than Lindbergh's after his transatlantic flight. An estimated 7.5 million people turn out. The streets are... The cheering is so loud MacArthur can't hear the people in the car with him speaking. America loves Douglas MacArthur. Whatever Harry Truman says, whatever the Constitution says, the American people have made their judgment and they side with the general. April 19, 1951. MacArthur addresses a joint session of Congress. Every seat is filled. The gallery is packed. Senators and representatives stand as MacArthur enters the chamber. The applause lasts 5 minutes. MacArthur's speech is masterful, emotional, powerful. He defends his career strategy. He criticizes limited war. He argues for total victory. And he ends with the line that becomes immortal. I am closing my 52 years of military service. When I joined the army, even before the turn of the century, it was the fulfillment of all my boyish hopes and dreams. The world has turned over many times since I took the oath on the plane at West Point, and the hopes and dreams have long since vanished, but I still remember the refrain of one of the most popular barracks ballads of that day, which proclaimed most proudly that old soldiers never die, they just fade away. And like the old soldier of that ballad, I now close my military career and just fade away. An old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Goodbye. The chamber erupts. Standing ovation. 30 minutes of applause. Members of Congress are weeping. Some are shouting. The emotion is overwhelming. Harry Truman watches on television from the White House. When someone asks him what he thinks, he says, "It was a good speech." MacArthur always knew how to make a speech. But privately, Truman is worried. His approval rating has dropped to 22%, the lowest of his presidency. Possibly the lowest presidential approval rating ever recorded at that time. Republicans are demanding impeachment. The press is calling him everything from weak to treasonous to communist sympathizer. Senator Joseph McCarthy, the communist-hunting demagogue, calls MacArthur's firing the greatest victory the communists have ever won. Senator Robert Taft demands Truman's impeachment. Congressman Joseph Martin introduces impeachment articles. Congress launches hearings. Senate Armed Services Committee combined with Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The question: did President Truman relieve General MacArthur for proper military reasons or for political reasons? Was this about protecting civilian control of the military or about silencing a critic? The hearings begin May 3, 1951. They last 7 weeks, until June 27th. 43 witnesses testify, thousands of pages of testimony. Every major figure in the Truman: Dean Acheson, George Marshall, Omar Bradley, the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff. And the testimony is unanimous. Every single military leader says the same thing: MacArthur had to be relieved. He violated the chain of command repeatedly. He contradicted presidential policy publicly. He conducted independent diplomacy without authority. He undermined Allied confidence in the UN command structure. General Omar Bradley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, delivers the most memorable testimony. He's asked about MacArthur's strategy for expanding the war into China. Bradley's response becomes famous: "Red China is not the powerful nation seeking to dominate the world. Frankly, in the opinion of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, this strategy would involve us in the wrong war, at the wrong place, at the wrong time, and with the wrong enemy." The wrong war, the wrong place, the wrong time, the wrong enemy. That line defines the entire debate. MacArthur wanted to attack China, use atomic weapons if necessary, win total victory. Truman wanted to contain the war, prevent it from spreading, negotiate a settlement, avoid World War III. Who was right? History is still debating that. But the constitutional question wasn't debatable. Military commanders do, presidents do, and generals who refuse to accept that have to be relieved, period. By the time the hearings end in late June, public opinion is starting to shift. Not dramatically, not overnight, but slowly people begin to understand what was at stake. Not just constitutional principle, civilian control of the military. MacArthur's presidential campaign, the one everyone expected, never materializes. He speaks at the 1952 Republican Convention, but the party nominates Eisenhower instead. MacArthur fades from public life. Not immediately, not completely, but gradually, like the old soldier he described himself as. By 1952, the crisis is over. Truman decides not to run for re-election, but not because of MacArthur, because he's tired, because he's done what he set out to do, because at age 68, after 7 years as president, he's ready to go home to Independence, Missouri. His decision to relieve MacArthur stands. No president has no Congress has condemned it. History has rendered its verdict. This wasn't Truman versus MacArthur. This was a 174-year-old constitutional principle being tested under modern conditions. Civilian control of the military. The principle George Washington established when he resigned his commission to Congress in 1783. The principle Abraham Lincoln defended when he relieved George McClellan for political insubordination in 1862. The principle Harry Truman enforced when he fired Douglas MacArthur in 1951. MacArthur was brilliant, no question. He won the Pacific War. He rebuilt Japan into a democracy. He executed Incheon, one of the most audacious military operations in history. He was arrogant, insubordinate, convinced of his own genius, but brilliant nonetheless. But he believed his military success gave him authority over policy. It didn't, never has, never will. In American democracy, the president outranks everyone, even legendary five-star generals, even brilliant strategists who've won wars. Truman was unpopular, uncharismatic, blunt, politically damaged by the time this crisis hit. But he understood something MacArthur never did. In America, civilians control the military. Not because civilians are smarter, not because civilians are better strategists, but because that's what the Constitution says. That's what the founders intended. That's what keeps America from becoming a military dictatorship where generals rule and elections don't matter. Years later, in his 1956 memoirs, Truman wrote about the decision. His perspective hadn't changed. His conviction hadn't wavered. I relieved MacArthur because he wouldn't respect the authority of the president. That's the key to the whole affair. It wasn't about policy. Smart people can disagree about policy. It was about who makes The Constitution makes that clear. The president does. Not theater commanders. Not brilliant strategists. The president. And if a general can't accept that, he can't remain in command. It's that simple. General Omar Bradley, in his 1983 memoir published shortly before his death, reflected on the crisis with the perspective of 3 decades. MacArthur was a great field commander, one of the greatest in America, but he never understood that military success doesn't grant political authority. He thought winning battles gave him the right to make policy. It doesn't. Truman understood that. That's why, despite the enormous political cost, despite the public hatred, despite the threats of impeachment, he made the right decision. History has proven him right. When MacArthur died in 1964, he was 84 years old. President Lyndon Johnson ordered full military honors. MacArthur's body lay in state in the Capitol Rotunda. Thousands came to pay respects. He was buried in Norfolk, Virginia, in a memorial befitting a 5-star general and American hero. Harry Truman, age 80, attended the funeral. Reporters asked him if he regretted firing MacArthur. If, looking back, he would have done anything differently. Truman's response was immediate and unequivocal. Not for 1 sec. I'd do it again tomorrow. A president who lets generals make policy isn't a president. He's a referee. And I wasn't elected to be a referee. I was elected to be president of the United States. That means making the hard decisions, even when they cost you everything.
In 1973,
2 years before Truman died, a group of historians conducted a survey. The question, was President Truman right to relieve General MacArthur in 1951? 93% said yes. 7% said no. The man who had a 22% approval rating in 1951 is now consistently ranked among the near-great presidents. The general who had a 69% approval rating is remembered for insubordination and constitutional overreach. History vindicated Harry Truman, not immediately, not in his lifetime politically, but eventually, definitively. Because he defended something more important than popularity, more important than political survival, more important than his own presidency. He defended the principle that in America, civilians control the military, that presidents outrank generals, that the Constitution means what it says, that no one, no matter how brilliant or successful or beloved, is above the law, even when it costs everything, especially when it costs everything. If this story showed you a side of history you've never seen before, do me a favor right now. Subscribe to WW2 Elite. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you think about Truman's decision. Was he right? Was it worth the cost? And which untold story should we tell next? We're building a community that refuses to let these critical moments disappear into footnotes. These are the decisions that shaped our world. These are the leaders who risked everything for principle. And their stories deserve to be told. I'll see you in the next one.